All right. We're going to look at another bad guy. Good lessons from bad guys. What our series is on this morning, or this quarter, and we're going to talk about a guy that is probably labeled as an opportunist. You probably can think of people that have been affected, or that has affected you, has affected others because of the opportunities they take at the expense of others. And as we read this, I think one of the things that the author is trying to do in the book that we're reading, and by the way, if y'all want to go out and get this book, it's called Good Lessons from Bad Guys by Mike O'Neill. Brings up some very good points. And we're going to be in chapter 21 of 1 Samuel here. And as we read stories in the Bible, these are being retained for us so we can apply them to our lives today. And we want to see how the effects of bad people, what do we do as God's people? How do we do this? So let's look at chapter 21. Now, David is on the run, by the way. Jonathan made good and let David escape, and Saul got angry with Jonathan about that. And but then in verse 21, in chapter 21, then David came to Nob, to Ahimelech the priest, and Ahimelech came trembling to meet David and said to him, "Why are you alone and no one with you?" Now, by the way, Nob is just about a couple of miles away from where the capital city, where it is. And the capital city at this time, or where Saul was, is not Jerusalem. And so anyway, it's just a short distance away from where Saul is. So David came to him, and he came out trembling. Ahimelech did, and so he knows that something's not right. He said, "Why are you alone and no one with you?" And David said to Ahimelech the priest, "The king has commissioned me with a matter, and has said to me, 'Let no one know anything about the matter on which I'm sending you, and with which I have commissioned you, and I have directed the young men to a certain place.'" Is that true? Is that a true statement that David just said? No. What's David doing? When he's not telling the truth, he's lying. David is lying. Okay. And so let's go on. And by the way, does Ahimelech have any reason to not believe him? Nope. He's an innocent victim. Verse 3, "Now therefore, what do you have on hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread, or whatever can be found." And the priest answered David and said, "There is no ordinary bread on hand, but there is consecrated bread, if only the young men have kept themselves from women." And David answered the priest and said to him, "Surely women have been kept from us, as previously when I set out, and the vessels of the young men were holy, though it was an ordinary journey. How much more than today will their vessels be holy?" So the priest gave him consecrated bread, for there was no bread there but the bread of the presence, which was removed from before the Lord in order to put hot bread in its place when it was taken away. So what was the law that David was breaking here? Well, what happens here, when they remove the bread and they replace it with hot bread, when they remove it, I think it's about every Sabbath. And but that bread is eaten by the priest, and it's consecrated. It's supposed to be for the priest. Well, David's taking the food basically based on a lie. He's taking the food, and he's hungry, of course, and his men are hungry. But he's taking the bread away from the priest, and that was just not done. That was breaking the law. Okay. Now, one of the servants of Saul was there that day, detained before the Lord, and his name was Doeg the Edomite, the chief of Saul's shepherds. Now, it's important that we read that he's an Edomite. Now, Doeg is by the way, the chapter here that the author brings out Doeg is the one that's the opportunist. And I kind of want to say that some of the blame is definitely on David. on what we see as the chain of events that occur here. Now, but Doeg is not a reputable character. Okay, first of all, he's an Edomite, and the land of or the nation of Edom, when the Israelites were wandering, they would not allow the children of Israel to cross over their land. They said, you're not allowed to go into Edom. Adversaries at best. And so during all this time that Saul evidently, they captured Edom later, and he saw that Doeg was definitely a strong character as far as he was a master shepherd, and so Saul brought him in to be the chief of his shepherds. And why was he detained? It was probably because it was the Sabbath and no work is done on the Sabbath. The priests are not allowed to do any work, and so they couldn't inspect the sheep. So he had to wait until the Sabbath was over. So Doeg was there, and he saw what was going on. And David said, and it's interesting. Right after they said that here's Doeg, the Edomite, David said to Ahimelech, "Now there is not a spear or sword on hand, for I brought neither my sword nor my weapons with me, because the king's matter was urgent." Now I can see maybe leaving without some food, but for a warrior type person, or the type of person that David was, to leave without a weapon seems kind of suspect, don't it? And so I don't know. It never says that Ahimelech questioned him, or except for the very beginning, what are you doing here? So Ahimelech pretty much put his hands and put his trust and basically his life in David's hands. And so verse 9, the priest said, "The sword of Goliath, the Philistine whom you killed in the valley of Elah, and behold, it is wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If you would take it for yourself, take it, for there is no other except here." And David said, "There is none like it. Give it to me." And then it says about David fleeing. Okay, so here's the setting. David, under the, whether it is, and some scholars have come back and said, hey, the king has set me on a journey. Some have come back and tried to justify what David did by saying, well, he was following the king, the God, God, his king. And that's kind of a, I think it's a far stretch. Of course, I'm not a scholar like some others. But regardless of whether it was for King Saul or God, David was deceiving Ahimelech. He was saying, hey, Saul sent me, or King sent me out on this mission, and he didn't. And so that's what kind of started things. But Doeg definitely was a person that, he might have still had some animosity against the Israelites, and he was, even though he was under their domain, under their government, their rule, he probably still had a little bit of, or no, more than likely had a little bit of animosity against them. So anytime that he can get an edge up, he would. And so anyway, jumping over into chapter 22, let's see what happened after, based on this event. And let's see, it's over in, let's see, on verse 22. Let's start in verse 20 of chapter 22. One son of Ahimelech, the son of named. Wait a minute. Excuse me, I got myself mixed up here. Okay, it's in chapter 22. Sorry, so starting at the very beginning. So David departed from there and escaped to the cave of Adullam. And when his brothers and all his father's household heard of it, they went down there to him. And everyone was in distress, and everyone who was in debt, and everyone who was discontented gathered to him, and he became captain over them. Now there were about 400 men with them. So what we see here is David is starting to get a following, if you will. And it kind of like the Robin Hood story. You know, it's almost like he's getting a set of followers, the people that were in distress under the government rule, and they're following David. They've seen him as a deliverer. And down in verse 6, then, when Saul heard that David and the men who were with him had been discovered, Saul was sitting in Gibeah under the tamarisk tree on the heights with his spear in his hand, and all his servants were standing around him. And Saul said to his servants who stood around him, "Hear now, O Benjamites, will the son of Jesse also give to all of you fields and vineyards? Will he make you all commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds?" Now remember, anytime you hear someone refer to David as the son of Jesse, that is a derogatory remark. That is a put down. That is because he is the anointed one. And the words got around that he's going to be the next king, and Saul's fighting against that. You know, Saul's becoming worse and worse and worse as time goes on. But anytime somebody refers to David as the son of Jesse, it's a put down. It's not acknowledging the anointed one as David is. Verse 8. For all of you who have conspired against me, so that there is no one who discloses to me when my son makes a covenant with the son of Jesse, and there is none of you who is sorry for me or discloses to me that my son has stirred up my servant against me to lie in ambush, as it is this day. Now here comes Doeg. Doeg is in there. He's among the audience there, and here he comes. He says, "Then Doeg the Edomite, who was standing by the servants of Saul, answered and said, I saw the son of Jesse come to Nob, to Ahimelech, and the son of Hittite." And I hope I'm saying all those words right. Here he is. He's there. Nobody is going to admit to seeing him or it's a tense time. But here Doeg is seeing the opportunity, seeing the chance for him to gain some favor from Saul. Okay, and he says, "Hey, I saw him," and he inquired of the Lord for him, gave him provisions, and gave him the sword of Goliath the Philistine. Then the king sent someone to summon Ahimelech the priest, the son of Ahitub, and all his father's household, the priests who were in Nob, and all of them came to the king. And Saul said, "Listen now, son of Ahitub." And he answered, "Here I am." Saul then said, "Why have you and the son of Jesse conspired against me, in that you have given him bread and a sword, and have inquired of God for him, that he should rise up against me by lying in ambush, as it is this day?" What do you think of him? Ahimelech thought about this. He was innocent, right? He was, I think he probably at that point in time says, "I've been deceived. Okay, I've been lied to, and now I'm up on charges, and I'm innocent." And so the innocent is sometimes they just fall victim to the surroundings. And like I said, when we actually think of these things, think of the times that we in our lives have fallen victim, and we're saying we're surprised. We're surprised by, and Ahimelech probably thought the same thing. David lied to me. If this is true, of course, we know what kind of guy Saul is, and so Ahimelech is surprised by all this. And then in 14, Ahimelech answered the king and said, "And who among all your servants is as faithful as David, even the king's son-in-law, who is captain over your guard and is honored in your house?" So Ahimelech is not only defending what he did, his actions, he's defending David, and that just really puts Saul over the edge. And said, "Did I just begin to inquire of God for him today? Far be it from me. Do not let the king impute anything to his servant or to any of his household of my father, for your servant knows nothing at all of this whole affair." But the king didn't believe him. He said, "You shall surely die, Ahimelech. you and all your father's household. And so an innocent person, as we see here in a little bit, an innocent person is about to die because he was lied to. Okay? And we can probably think, I don't know as to the point of death, but there had probably been cases like this before this and after this, of where somebody's innocent. We hear of times a lot where someone is innocent and put in prison. There's a statue down on, or a statue down on 19th and University of a person that spent, I think he died in jail, in fact, that he was innocent. And but he so just because you follow the Lord, you don't know what the Lord's plans are. That doesn't mean that you're going to not be victim to the evil that's in this world. But here's what I think is interesting about this story. 17, the king said to the guards who were attending him, turn around and put the priest of the Lord to death, because their hand also is with David, because they knew that he was fleeing and did not reveal it to me. But the servants of the king were not willing to put forth their hands to attack the priest of the Lord. Now, what does that say about Saul? You know, if his own, you about to say something, Chris? Yeah, and his people said that. His people revealed that. The servants of the king were not willing to do that. Then the king said to Doeg, because now why did he turn to Doeg? Because he's the one that's conspiring. You know, he's the one that brought it up. He's the one that he could probably tell. Now, in literature, not outside the Bible, in rabbi literature, evidently Doeg was quite a leader, even though he's an Edomite. He had a following as well. Okay, and so he was well known. And no, you know, even though he might have been very conspiring and questionable in its own way, he was well known. And so he turned to Doeg and said, "You attack the priest." And so he did. He turned around and attacked the priest, and he killed that day 85 men who wore the linen ephod. And he struck Nob, the city of the priest, with the edge of the sword, both men and women, children and infants, also oxen, donkeys, and sheep. He struck with the edge of the sword. And so later on, the son of Ahimelech fled and told David about all the events. And when David heard about this, he knew what had happened. He knew that what had happened to, he blamed Doeg for this. However, don't you think he knew that his lie started all this story, started all this? He lied. Of course, he was fleeing from Saul. He might have felt like he was justified for maybe something like that, but probably he still said, my lie caused the death of all those people. So what we need to do today to take this lesson to internalize it for us is know that not maybe not to this drastic measures, but think about and when were you a victim of an opportunist? And have you been? I think all of us probably have been at one point in time. I can think of a person that in my career that did just that. But also, how many times, hopefully, we don't do this. But here is David. We know what David turns into. He's a man after God's own heart. But at this point in time, he lied, and he took the opportunity, probably out of fear, not to gain his stature like Doeg did, but he did do something to save his own skin. And so we got to consider that as well. We also need to, there's several stories that we can come up with. And what do we do? Do we see an injustice being done? Do we stand up to protect the innocent? Now, let me just kind of discuss this for a second. What do you think? How could he have approached this different, going to Ahimelech instead of lying to him? What could he have said? What could he have done? Right? We know what he did. Is there anything that you think that he could have done? What if he told him the truth? Says, I'm on the run for my life. I'm hungry. Do you think Ahimelech would have given him shelter? Well, we did see that Ahimelech came out trembling. He was scared. He was wondering what was going on. So if anything could have done differently, now does God direct people to lie? Does God direct anybody to do that? So he really wasn't under, God didn't tell him to go and lie to Ahimelech. So what could he have done? Now, it's kind of hard to imagine. You're not there in that situation. You're not David. You don't know what he was feeling at the time, other than fear. And a good point, right? And Isaac lied. There you go. Yeah, yeah. So regardless of what he did, he still had that. He had that command. He had that leadership quality that people were drawn to. So you're right. Okay. Anything else on that? Yeah. Okay. Right. And I think it's good to read that Psalms. I'm going to read it in its entirety. Um, so why do you boast in evil, O mighty man? The loving kindness of God endures all day long. Your tongue devises destruction like a sharp razor, O work of deceit. You love evil more than good, falsehood more than speaking what is right. You love all words that devour, and O deceitful tongue. But God will break you down forever. He will snatch you up and tear you away from your tent, and uproot you from the land of the living. And the righteous will see and fear and will laugh at him and saying, behold, the man who would not make God his refuge, but trusted in the abundance of his riches and was strong in his evil desire. And so you're right. And then the rest of that's what is what Chris read. But as for you know, if you look at the Psalms like that, and David, that's his repentant heart. He knew that what was happening, but he also recognized that the evil in Doeg and how he was an opportunist. Uh, and so um, now about our reaction to this, and so when we see an opportunist, there have been times when I see something happening that's not right, and many times when I'm not personally involved, I look the other way. I honestly admit that, and I shouldn't. Now, what does God wants us to do? God wants us to stand up and defend the person that's being a victim of someone else's deceit. And there are times when I have stood up, and it takes some courage. So I think what we need to learn from this is uh, now David wasn't in the position at the time that this happened, okay, but he did repent. He did take care of Ahimelech's son after that, um, and he. But just to kind of think how we would react if we were there, or how we would react now, because we have had people um, lie to us. Uh, just just think of the the people in business today just to get ahead, and people that want to. They don't necessarily lie, but they use the truth to deceive, or they don't tell you the whole truth. Okay, huh? That's lying. That's deceitfulness. Okay, um, and so it really does affect us pretty much on a daily basis. We see. Uh, I mean, we pick on politicians a lot, but it's true. One of the politicians that I'm not going to name his name. Joe knows who I'm talking about. But every time they asked him a question, he gave such a political answer that he didn't answer the question. And he was a favorite of around here. Okay, and he just did all kinds of things to avoid the question. And then also, pretty much at the very end of his statement, he could always come back and say, well, I voted this way. He always brought it back to where he was doing the right thing, but he never would answer the question as to why certain things had happened. So I just said that guy was a worthless politician. Well, he finally retired, and everybody gave him all kinds of praise. Now, I'm not a politician. I don't know all the time things but to me, he didn't. He didn't. He didn't really fulfill his position. And that's true about a lot of people. It's not just politicians, it's anyone. I've seen business people deceive just to get ahead. I've seen people talk about others and bring them down just to get ahead. I've seen people have a stage supposed to be talking about a certain thing, supposed to be talking about a certain subject, and they might talk about it a little bit, and then they turn to where they would say, uh, bringing them or their cause or whatever it is to the forefront, to where and lead people astray. Um, so, what is our reaction to this? Like I said in the past, and that if it doesn't personally affect me, I tend to look the other way. Should we? You know, is that considered to be an opportunity that God gives us to stand up and do what's the right thing? It's interesting to me that when the priest or when the soldiers of Saul um, would not kill Ahimelech or the people, um, why did they not fight against Doeg when he started killing the Ahimelech and ransacked the city of Nob? Where were they? They said, we're not going to. No, we're going to stand aside. We're not going to do that against the priest. But then they didn't fight against them. So we're not in their shoes. We don't know the whole story there. But should they have? Could they have? And should they have? What? Yeah. Take care of the other. Yeah. Right. In Saul's heart. Yeah. 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 His allegiance to David. Yeah. Yeah. So, so anyway, now when it kind of gives the or it reads that Doeg killed 85 people, but we know it was a lot. It was an army. Doeg had his followers, and then they ransacked the city of Nob. But to bring it back again, like I said, it takes some courage on our part to, if we need to stand up for someone and continue that. I mean, if it brings in, like we said, his soldiers, his servants would not harm Ahimelech, the priest, but they didn't take to arms. We don't know if they couldn't or if they just wouldn't. But if we have the opportunity to do that, what should we do? And so, like I said, it is a nerve-wracking situation if you take a stand. If you take a stand, you got to constantly be praying to God to protect you, um, and to really to to have courage during that time. Yeah. Now, as as a story, now who gets attacked more? Let's turn over to Matthew 12. It's Matthew 12, and we're starting in verse 1. Now, the story here, we read the story about David. Did David, initially, this story started by David going to Ahimelech and asking for bread. No bread was there other than the consecrated bread, so he said, give that to me. So not only did he lie to Ahimelech about what he was doing out there, but he ate some consecrated bread that at the time, it was against the law. It was against there. And so in verse 12, Jesus brings this up. Let's start reading in verse 1. At that time, Jesus went on the Sabbath through the grain fields, and his disciples became hungry and began to pick the heads of grain and eat. But when the Pharisees saw it, they said to him, behold, your disciples do what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath. But he said to them, have you not read what David did when he became hungry, and he and his companions, how he entered the house of God? They ate the consecrated bread, which was not lawful for him to eat, nor for those with him, but for the priest alone. Or have you not read in the law that on the Sabbath the priest in the temple break the Sabbath and are innocent? And of course, he's bringing up a point there that David sinned, but right now at this point in time, the Pharisees are not holding that against David. Why? Because David became a king, he became a great man, and so what happens in a lot of times, we go back and look at these great men, and our first reaction is uh, people like David, people like Abraham, people like they would do, or Moses. They were, what they did might have looked like sin, but it was justified. Lying was justified. Well, and it really isn't. It never is. And so the Pharisees had gotten to the point where they said what David did was justified because he was on the run, etc. So what I'm saying here is, did Jesus sin? No, Jesus did not sin. And so what the Pharisees have gotten to is, David sinned but was justified. Jesus did not sin, and he's getting attacked. He's getting abused or getting attacked on that. What of our lives? Have we gone to the point to now to where, I think it's good to recognize that David did sin, and what was his reaction? As we see, he repented of it. He wrote that psalm, and he was very repentant of it. Probably, like you said, it wore on his conscience quite a bit. But what did he do? And he sinned, of course, after that, but he was still a man after God's own heart. We need to judge our actions. If we have the opportunity to stand up for if it doesn't affect us, look the other way. No, we need to stand up for people. We need to stand up for the injustice being done. And even then, sometimes we may not address an injustice if we're afraid it's going to harm us, and we say, well, we'll just have to live with this. We're living in stressful times. I think this is stressful times, but we still are living in stressful times because of the COVID. Wear a mask, not wear a mask, be safe, wash your hands. The government that's probably going to come into play, all the conspiracies that are going on. It's stressful times. So we may be called upon to stand up for something, an injustice being done. And whether it affects us or not, how do we react? How do we take that? What do we do with it? And we know that there's going to be people like Doeg are going to be, they've been here since the beginning of time, and they will continue to be there. So what do we take away from this story? First of all, there's one of the stories that this guy wrote about. One of his experiences was he was brought into he owned a timeshare, and he was brought into this is a small example, but he was brought into an audience like everybody else, saying, we just want to present to you something, and it'll take 30 minutes. Well, after an hour, he stood up and said, you guys are lying to us. Okay, you said 30 minutes. It's already been an hour. It doesn't look like you're going. So he says, I'm leaving. And the whole audience left. And with it, he was applauded as a hero. He goes, I didn't think myself a hero. I just stood up and said, this was not right. Now, that's a small example, of course. It's just, but you hate being deceived and hate being lied to. And so if you stand up for your rights, I'm thinking that you really got to stand up for others as well. Put yourself in their shoes. And I think there's a lot of stories in what this is, from David lying to the Ahimelech, the innocent one, to the priest or the servants that wouldn't kill the priest and then not defending. You just don't know a bunch. There are some details you may not know about, but just be aware of the opportunist and how do we react to those people. Any comments on this? Okay. We're finishing a little early because we started early, but unless there's any other comments, that's our lesson. I had planned on, when I started this lesson, and I've been very remiss about this, but what I'm going to commit to and promise to you this week is I'll send you emails to what our next study is going to be, so y'all can read ahead. And hopefully I'll have you get some questions y'all can think about. Okay, thank you guys.